Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. How can 5 colors actually help our nervous system? Dysregulation is at its highest as we've seen it in many, many recent years. And then you've got these colors. So let's think about how we could put colors into action, help regulate our system, be emotionally aware, and make sure that that awareness allows all of us to lean into stabilizing, regulating, and really understanding our nervous system. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today on the podcast, we have a wonderful OT. I'm always eager to chat with OTs as an SLP. Leah Kuypers, students. Leah, I just want to turn it over to you. I want to thank you for being here and also ask you just to tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey as an OT, occupational therapist, and how you arrived at this great groundbreaking material curriculum called the Zones of Regulation.
Yeah, well, thanks, Sharon. It is always an honor to get to speak to people like you doing this work too, and really supporting the community. And I am an OT at heart. I worked in the schools as well as the clinical setting, and I just kept seeing over and over again the regulation needs being front and center of what was really inhibiting kids from being able to live their fullest lives and participate in, what was meaningful to them, whether that be, staying in the classroom with their peers or, having kids to sit with at lunch, outside activities. And it also was what was the hardest for the adults in the room and trying to figure out how to support these kids. And, it felt more often than not, we were just kind of throwing our hands up, I'm not sure what to do. And too often, then more disciplinary practices came into place that I felt just really uncomfortable with. I saw kids' self-esteem plummeting, their confidence, and it wasn't making a difference when they don't have the underlying skills to do something different. So that, teaching them a lesson wasn't effective. How do we really, truly develop the skill set and put it in lessons and a curriculum that could, develop and foster these regulation competencies rather than, shame on, blame, or punish them for the lack of it.
I relate to it so much because just in my own practice as a speech pathologist, I've just seen the evolution of how we deal with these behaviors and trying to tease apart what is a true behavior, a true response to something, which also isn't going to be in the form of necessarily, okay, you know what, you did that, this is what you get in return, right? So we've changed our practices, but then teasing apart the regulation, is this child truly dysregulated? I find to be really, really sometimes difficult to tease apart. Is this a trauma response and that's why they're dysregulated? Is this merely just a behavior that they've adopted from a peer, right? Or is it maybe even a sensory processing difficulty? So it's so hard to tease all the parts. And I know I had the sensory SLP on here, Jesse Ginsburg, who also works on this in this, realm. And where is it the regulation piece where you see the individual in distress, they're dysregulated, and that's why they're maybe quote unquote acting out as people perceive? Or is it more a behavioral challenge?
And I think, wherever you land in that query, I think that's, super important to get curious about the behavior and understanding, and I do trainings and we talk about what's under the hood. If we do this kind of car analogy, and it's you need to understand the sensory processing, the executive functioning, the social cognition, the communication of the learner. And if trauma is causing can be impactful of the development of those as well. But then also you got to think about what's the terrain of this learner, what's kind of been the road they've traveled upon. And we can't, necessarily do a lot about where they've came from. However, we can really help try to smooth the road going forward and build the skills and, set up a terrain that supports regulation in a climate that's going to allow it to thrive in.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think, it's complex nevertheless. But I always like to think about, behaviors communication, or I think of it, it's
Hmm.
communicating dysregulation,
Hmm.
whether if even if it is a behavior they've adopted or been pressured into because of a peer, is it serving them well? And that's the question we're trying to help learners come to think about. And then, what are my goals? What does wellness look like for me in this situation? And that doesn't necessarily mean calm, so sometimes we need to be upregulated,
Hmm.
and that's going to work well for us in a situation. A different trying to go to bed, you want to be downregulated, and
Right.
that's what works well for you. So it's about understanding the context, the goals, and then thinking about, do I need to regulate to support myself in, this situation with these feelings, with this energy state, with my sensory needs or whatever might be kind of layered in there.
Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out because I've worked alongside occupational therapists for my whole career. Regulation has been something that I've been able to collaborate with them on, including using your zones of regulation. And one thing that I've observed is the same thing that you're saying, which is there are times that need that high arousal or that level of regulation that's a little bit more intense. Because again, how are you going to play a sports activity with very low regulation? How are you
Right.
going to attend to a task if your arousal level is really low, right? But then again, there are other times, for example, in class where the expectation is keep it lower. Obviously, there are going to be different levels of regulation even within a classroom. So now let's kind of put you on the spot with your zones of regulation. So your zones of regulation is something that can help anybody, really, anyone, because I've used it and I've used it alongside difficult behaviors that, like you said, is a form of communication, different individuals that had sensory needs. So, how can all of us use your zones of regulation to support all of these regulation challenges?
Yeah. Well, so just to kind of simply lay it out there, there, we teach that there's 4 zones that can help us think about, communicate around, and regulate our emotions, our energy level. We talk about this levels of alertness. And so we're putting a simple framework or also language around this, as well as a visual colored structure. So the blue zone is like these lower levels of alertness, energy's down, sad, sick, tired, bored. Green is more aligns with feeling calm, kind of neutral emotions, energy levels. We put happy in there, focused. Then the yellow zone, our energy starts getting up, but I think of it still as still having some of that executive functioning a little more easily tapped into. So we might be excited, feeling, silly, maybe worried, feeling a little stressed about something. That can be the yellow zone. And then if that continues to kind of escalate to bigger energy levels and more intense feelings, that's the red zone. So that's when our feelings really overwhelm us. So it might be panicked, it might be devastated, angry, furious, as well as, elated, euphoric. So it's when we are overcome by these, really big feelings that have a lot of kind of force with them. And all these feelings are natural. All these zones are going to be expected, therefore. So it's not about being in any one particular zone. It's about having awareness of what zone you're in and learning to read your body, and after we have that awareness, we start thinking about, well, what's the situation am I in? What is my goal in this situation? And do I need to regulate? What tools are going to help me? So then the zones framework allows them to also pair tools for each of their zones. So when they're in their red zone, those tools are going to work a lot differently to support the regulation than, say, the blue zone tools. That might help them become more alert and energized, for example. So it provides that simple language, the simple framework to really build what we would call a metacognitive pathway to think about and approach regulation.
Yeah, I think it's so great that there's a color coding system because every SLP and OT loves a good color coding system, but also that each level is not prescribed in the sense of, okay, you're going to be at this level when this happens. You're going to be at this level when this happens, because that's not just life, but then also pairing it with tools, accessible tools, which when they find themselves in a zone that could be maybe too overwhelming for them to handle or maybe underwhelming, they can actually use these tools in the moment. So the way that these tools are set up, though, they are individualized, right, based on each individual's needs. So how do you individualize it?
That's a process. And, just to back up a second, what you said about, you know, the zones and, it's not about ever putting a zone in an environment like, oh, we're going into the library, you need to be in the green zone, for
Right.
example. It's about really honoring where they're at and then them deciding, you know what, I might feel kind of silly as I come in and I might need to take a couple deep breaths to be successful when I'm, you know, in media class or whatever.
Right.
But it's not about trying to pressure them. And if that's the case, then that's a misuse of the zones of regulation. And it is also, as you said, about them individualizing what tools work for them. So it's not about forcing them to use a tool either. It's really laid out in the curriculum. So we're trying to proactively teach this. This shouldn't be something that they only hear about when maybe there's a challenging behavior and then in that moment they're supposed to use a tool that isn't practiced. Rather, there is a whole set of lessons, instructions, as well as climate practices that we're working to put into place so that over time they have that awareness of, yep, I'm in the yellow and you know what, I might need to regulate that. And I know this tool and that tool would be a good choice because they're easy to access in this setting. It has a, calming effect on me that's going to help me feel more in control of my yellow zone. And the teacher is going to be okay with me using it because we know the zones, we do the zones, and this is, regulation is the norm. It's not the exception for just one student. So we have that climate in place too that really facilitates everyone getting their needs met in the way that's going to best suit them.
Yeah, I want to quote you on that. Regulation is the norm, not the exception, right? Because I see how classrooms have evolved over the years as well, just being in education and being in the schools and seeing how regulation is so difficult. And it's so difficult for the teachers because a lot of them may not have the education that we have. And also, and maybe you could speak more to this, although this is going to be another podcast, but episode, this has to be a part two, but because we could talk about this one for hours, but the screen time and impacting the ability to regulate when someone, spent the whole night on video games or, doom scrolling for much of their evening and then come to school and then they're expected to kind of switch that mode off. And then, so there is something going on in the water where I've seen a lot more dysregulation in these classrooms. And I wonder if there is a way for the teachers to no matter what's going on, use these zones for all students, and then also have things in place, like if something is entering the red zone, but they're in the classroom, maybe they could do something before, like something preventative.
Yeah. So, when we think about supporting regulation, everyone has regulation needs from, the teacher, the caregivers, as well as all the kids, right?
Yeah.
And as adults, we often mindlessly attend to our regulation. It's like, oh, I need another cup of coffee to keep me going. And
Yeah.
I'm going to, maybe kind of stretch or pop some, really flavorful breath mints in to kind of get myself going or whatever. But we're regulating throughout the day. But when we can create a inclusive space where it just becomes part of the woven fabric of that space where the adults talking about their regulation and modeling their practices and essentially lending their frontal lobe by talking through some of how they're feeling and what they're doing to support their regulation. We're then helping those learners through co-regulation and modeling build these practices. And yes, we certainly can, identify learners who are divergent in their regulation needs and need more support. But the reality is that we all have regulation needs on this, through life. And when, right, they're often not, they're getting kind of regulated by iPads and
Mhm.
more tech. And it's hard for me to be out in the community and you see a fussy, like 1.5-year-old, and they just push an iPad or a phone in front of them. And I'm like,
Mhm.
no, like they need to learn coping skills.
Yes.
And this
Yeah.
is a co-regulation opportunity, and that's going to help them develop their self-regulation. And so, yeah, I mean, there's everyone stands to benefit from regulation. And, for me, what was really eye opening is I had kids on my caseload who were, you know, anywhere from early childhood through transition age. So, 21-year-olds. And, it was frightening to see some of the secondary age kids thinking about transitioning into the real world. And they might have the math abilities, they had the reading skills, but they didn't have the regulation skills to be
Mhm.
successful. And I had a lot of kids who were moving in and out of the juvenile system back into education and so on. And I just wanted a better future for them. And, to me, that was really trying to help them build these regulation competencies and giving them an easy system as teenagers of how they could think through their regulation. So that really was an inspiration for me to like boil it down to 4 colors that they could monitor where their feelings and alertness was at, and then really individualize their toolboxes to regulate. And so as they get older, we talked about like, you don't need to always be talking about the zones. It's just a way to think. It's giving you this framework to think about your regulation. And you might notice when you're on your job site, like, this is stressful and I'm getting into the yellow zone and I know what to do about that. Like I have these tools that I can help. And this one would work well right now. So it's just trying to really equip them for the real world and, all the ups and downs that come with life.
Yeah, I mean, you touched upon a few very important things that I would like to tap your brain about, but the coping strategy piece, that's huge, right? And that's really what this is designed to do and what your work is designed to do is equip individuals with all types of regulation challenges or even ones that don't have the challenge, or actually everyone does, but maybe not, it doesn't show itself as much because maybe they're low arousal children, but to equip them with these coping strategies so that in moments of dysregulation, frustration, which could be coming from pretty much anything, whether it's screen time or trauma or the person in front of them that just can't stop annoying them, they can do something like, our cup of coffee in the morning can be so critical, right? We don't have our cup of coffee, right? Then we're like, okay. But that self-talk piece seems to be also really nice to say, oh, I haven't had my cup of coffee, so I'm feeling a little dysregulated now. And so I am going to do this in order to calm down. Like that metacognitive piece, I think is so
Yeah.
great that you
Well,
introduced.
with regulation, I followed Claire Kopp's research,
Hmm.
and I also am a big fan of the CERTS model with Presence and
Yeah, Carrie Present.
yeah, Emily and Amy Laurent and all the co-authors. But when we think about looking at regulation and the development, like this is a developmental skill, just like learning to read, learning, to communicate. And so we need to recognize that learners are on, different developmental pathways in that process. And when we think about their progression, a lot of our learners are primarily using behavior strategies. They might be, bolting out of the space or maybe aggressing as they continue. The next stage is language based strategies. And so the zones does offer a really nice bridge to help build those language strategies because you can do it non-verbally with the colors and the visuals with the zones. You can also have this simplified language that captures, state. And that I want to kind of put a pause on that though. We really do teach emotions too. It's not just we're teaching colors. Like we boil
Right.
down and do a lot of work on identifying those feelings and building the interoception as well, and being aware of how we're feeling and what zone we're in. But then building out those language strategies is the next developmental skill. So they can say, I feel frustrated, or I'm in the red,
Yeah.
or, I need help or whatnot. To then, as we continue as we move into neurotypical development around the preschool years, we start emerging with our metacognitive strategies, and we still continue to develop those even in adulthood.
Yeah.
And so that's where we can start building those self-regulation competencies. But up to that point, we are predominantly using co-regulation to support our regulation needs. And so we need that attuned caregiver, that attentive teacher, that
Right.
support network to help model it, to help foster what healthy regulation looks like, and to help the learner build the awareness, the language,
Yeah.
kind of the thinking patterns around this to be able to do it more
Right.
independently.
Yeah, and that's great because because again, I guess you read my mind because I was going to ask you about, using it in your older years, but you answered my question, which is that it could be used at any age, at any time in your life, but doesn't have to be in that frame of, okay, this is a red, this is a yellow. You can even just, kind of create your own model for it in terms of what you're feeling and why, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't have to follow that regimented kind of, cute. I mean, it's very cute to use it at that
Right.
age, but at the younger years, but even if you're coming into it even now, if you're listening to it and you haven't never dealt with the zones of regulation before, it's still something you can utilize in your daily practice. It's still something you could start. It's never too late to use
It's
it.
never too late. Yeah. And that's like I had a high school kid I was working with once, and I checked in with him, and he told me he was in the brown zone. And I was like, oh, what's the brown zone? And he goes, I'm having a really shitty day. I was like, well, I got it. Like
That's
I've
great.
been, yeah, I've been in the brown zone lots of days. Like,
That's great though,
I
but
was
to
like,
get creative
don't
with
tell
it.
anyone I'm teaching you that, but like,
Yeah.
but I
Imagine
hear
someone
you.
comes to his parents and saying, "Oh, by the way, yeah, I just learned
Yeah.
today that brown is the shitty zone." But yeah, it's actually kind of cool that so many have actually tested the colors around and said, "Oh, well, there's an in between zone." Like I had a student
Yeah.
once tell me, "Wait, there's a green zone because I'm kind of feeling yellow, but I kind of feeling not yellow, so I'm kind of in between somewhere, where I'm feeling like maybe a little tense, but not so tense yet."
Yeah, like a chartreuse green, or
Yeah,
something, or a lime green, yeah.
yeah,
So, yeah, I
that's
really
great.
encourage kids to, you make it their own, and that's, like, for some kid, maybe stressful for them, or boredom is stressful and it's
Yes,
yellow. In another kid's zones, he's gonna say, "Well, boredom to me is like blue zone." I'm, like, just kinda, like, bored
right.
and down, and like so the zones can be really adaptable to like how each individual perceives these feelings too, and it gives a general structure, but it allows for those variances. And then yes, there's so many creative kids out there and adults, and you're
Yeah,
just kind of like, yep, yeah, take it and run. I as long as people are not making this pressure to get back to the green, that is something that I've been trying really hard to move people away from, because I acknowledge the green zone can feel nice and like it's like calm or connected nervous system state, but it doesn't mean we need to be there or that we're going to get there. When I originally wrote the curriculum back in I wrote it first in 8 for my capstone and for
well,
my master's, and then it
you
was
were
published
really
in
ahead of your time, yeah.
2011. And so I made references about, and we'll get back to the green zone, just a reassuring, like, you won't always have these, big feelings and you'll move through the zones. But that really unintentionally got misapplied. And people started using the zones as a behavior program and not in like a proactive instructional model.
Right.
And so that was something that I've really, as the Zones has evolved and we published our second edition, the Zones of Regulation, now it's on a digital platform, we have eliminated any sort of language and any sort of opportunity to misuse the zones. So we have a whole lesson on all the zones are okay and helping build perspective, taking that, one kid going into, say, a school dance might be like, oh, this is fun. I'm excited in the yellow. And another kid is like, I'm terrified in the red. Like,
Yeah.
I refuse to even go
Yeah.
because I want nothing to do with a school dance. And so there's not like a free notion of, what it should be. We really work to honor each other's perspectives. And, regulation would look very different for those two kids. That kid
Right.
coming for the dance in the yellow zone, that may work really well for them as they have a lot of energy and they're jumping on the dance floor to the music. You probably don't need to regulate that yellow zone in that situation where
I
the
would.
kid
On the dance floor, I would need to regulate myself.
might it get too red.
Yeah. Might enter the red zone, bright red zone, actually.
Right,
They
right. Yeah, I hear you. I get.
no,
I
I'm
love.
saying, but yeah, in jest, but yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Dancing is one of those things that I can get a little carried away with too.
Me too. I mean,
At
I
my
just think
hip,
it's great. It's just so fun,
it
and
is
it's
so
especially when
fun.
you're at like an event and people are just sitting around. It's like I'm bored. I'm I'm in the boring zone. I'm in the green zone. I need to get out of not green. I'm in the
Blue.
blue zone, right? And so my tool is to get up there and dance. And then
Yeah.
that's my strategy. But yeah,
Yeah.
I get carried away. But anyway, so yes, you're right. So there are different ways of responding in every situation. And I feel like we should all understand each other better because I think that even as adults, I've observed, even with friends or family members, right? What one thing can be really filling your cup and making you excited for it and keeping you in like this low arousal or medium arousal, not too excited state can really make someone feel like they're in the red zone before they even entered the event, because sometimes an event can be really overwhelming for people. So that's why I love the individualized approach. And also you spoke to something I wanted to touch upon about how people were kind of misusing or misunderstanding how to use this. So like everything else, unfortunately, sometimes things are used in a very prescriptive way. And the social thinking model that I always used infused with a lot of Michelle Garcia Winner's work, who was actually on here also, said it's all focused on not saying that you're here and this is what we're going to do to fix it. It's all focused on let's be aware. Let's observe together where we're at. Let's observe together. I'm noticing that you are feeling a little bit maybe in the red zone. I don't know. I'm practicing this right now. And I'm noticing that you're maybe feeling a little bit bored or, I'm noticing. So I'm thinking that maybe this is what is going on because of that. So it's not trying to fix, right? It's not trying to put somebody in another zone.
Yes. It's definitely, we're not trying to put someone in another zone, and we're really trying to honor where everyone shows up and let them know that's okay. And like, if there is, say, challenging behavior that occurs, it's not because of the zone they're in, it's the behavior.
Yeah.
That would have a consequence tied to it. So we wouldn't, give a consequence because you feel this way. And our zones are based on our feelings, what's going on inside of us. So we really try to separate anything behavioral related is not tied to zones. It's
A separate entity.
consequences, do occur, positive and negative, but it shouldn't be about based on one zone.
Yeah. And so when you touched upon the advocacy piece and how, the building block of all of this, like everything else, is a self-awareness, right? Developing an awareness of the emotions, that interoception, what you're feeling inside, right? And then equipping with the strategy so that people understand which strategies to use, the perspectives, and then ultimately being able to say something like, I'm feeling this way right now, and maybe they need help, right? And I need your support right now. Or I'm feeling this way right now, so I'm going to take that break. And so it breaks my heart when I hear you talking about how so many of these, not so many, but you didn't say so many, but some of these students that you worked with are, in juvenile detention or They're coming back from juvenile detention. And I've seen that a lot too with the dysregulated folks, that it manifests as these behaviors, and these behaviors can be really challenging to the environment that they're in. And so there are repeated suspensions, right? So they keep getting suspended over and over again. And when I asked them about how their suspension was, they said that it was great. And I said, why? And they said, oh, I was just home, doing what I wanted to do. So just to speak a little bit more to this regulation piece, there are so many more referrals with suspensions and with juvenile detention, just from my research and from what I see in the school setting. And so what do you find is causing all of this, where there's so many referrals to these? Is it because we're not really looking at the regulation in a way that can support? Are we not trauma informed? Or is it a combination of so many different things?
I mean, I think it's a combination of so many things. Like schools are operating often with a lack of funding. There's bigger class sizes. Teachers are constantly asked to do more things. And you need to act as the OT and the speech pathologist and the autism teacher and, and teach everyone else in your classroom too. And, I know that, there's often, my kids are in public school here in Minneapolis, and, they're losing all the
Funding?
English language support aids. And so now all these kids have, a huge life event of being new to country, and they're losing their language interpret, support, and they're bored in class, they're frustrated, the trauma they may have been through, all that, they're not picking up. And so we see that's just one example of so many, where it's this compounding of factors coming into our classrooms, and the lack of resources I see to be able to manage that is hard. And there's no budget for any of. I mean, I don't want to get into it.
I know, but no, I hear you. It's not political. It's just a reality.
I think that's the reality. And so there's just not a bandwidth to be able to take on 45 learners in a middle school classroom.
Crazy.
With so many unique needs. And so you have to call for support. They get pushed out.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. I think, certainly the tech era that we're in is, as I said, we're not learning the skills we're not in the same natural environments we were in, 10 years ago, before everyone had a handheld device in front of them, every child. And so they're not having the same contextual clues to kind of pick up, and the supports. I mean, adults too. I think so many of us adults, and I'll, put myself in this, I'm guilty of being on my phone too. And instead of parenting, I'm working, looking through my email and trying to click through a couple more tasks to stay on top of things, for example.
Right.
Or consumed by, say, a news headline or something, and so then it's the kids on the devices, it's adults on devices that, are factors too. The dopamine hit. Yeah. I mean, that's real. So I can't say it's just one thing. There's, been a lot of we're Minneapolis residents. The kids in Minneapolis have gone through so much trauma. Just as in a community, it's been unreal, and that's not trauma I had to deal with.
I just think of this. The Gen Z, Gen Alpha, I always refer to them as that because I don't know what else to call them with the 2-word utterances, and the cute little language. But I just observe and reflect on how much they've been through, because I have nieces and nephews that are in their teenage years, and just, it was one thing after another. COVID really hit hard. And so they lived through that global pandemic, which to us was something we've never seen before.
Right.
We didn't experience in our childhood. And then after COVID, there were all these other things going on in terms of, I mean, there are always things going on, but huge, big,
Yeah, we had George Floyd.
Yeah.
And right in our community.
Yes.
And the riots, and right, that was a month into COVID, and that was extremely frightening
Yeah.
for my daughter packed up her entire room, scared our house was gonna burn down.
Wow. Yeah.
And then we had an Annunciation shooting, we
Yeah.
had the and those kids who perished is like right down the street from us. We had
Really? Oh,
the
wow.
ice surge. We had, yeah, it's just been so
It's one thing
these are
after. Yeah.
things that other kids like in previous generations, in my childhood, we didn't have. So,
Right.
I that is definitely compounding trauma for them.
Yeah. So yeah, no, it sounds like the trauma levels have increased because it's compounded by all these things, including the devices and just even just events that are occurring. And also the events that are occurring in real time because of the phone. So I even find myself like having to take a deep breath and a gasp because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is happening and this is happening and this is happening. Whereas when I was growing up, I didn't know so much. Ignorance is
Right.
bliss, right?
Right.
Now you're seeing stuff
Unless
you
your
don't even
parents
see.
flipped on,
Yeah.
the
The news.
nightly news, you
Yeah,
didn't
and
really
even the nightly
know.
news, I mean, compared to what's going on now, like, what we're seeing at our fingertips, like, the nightly news was just like a walk in the park. I mean, there were serious things going on, but compared to what we see and, like, sometimes it's not even true, sometimes it's infused with AI, so but again, these kids have to sift through that. But to your point about the educators being overwhelmed, like, that's a real concern. A lot of teachers are either leaving the role completely or not going into teaching because of the fact that the regulation issues have increased, but the ratio from teacher to classroom size has not decreased necessarily. In many cases, has increased. And so I could even just see that as being dysregulating for everybody, including the adult who probably needs a couple of Advil by the time they're done with that classroom, right? And I've seen them. I've seen them in so much pain and distress. So I know these are problems that we can't fix overnight, but there are things that we can address and that we can work on. And one of those things is that I've noticed is in all of this, the kid goes through high school, they're an adolescent now, they're becoming a young adult, and then they have to go to college if they want to. Or they go and they have a job, whatever it may be. And you spoke about employment and regulating even in employment. And then, especially for our neurodivergent teens and tweens who may be still co-regulating a bit more, they're thrust into a whole new environment and are forced to regulate and keep calm or try to figure out all their executive functioning challenges with minimal supports in some cases because not all schools are so accommodating as our school systems. So these transitions can be really, really difficult. Like, do you have any advice that you would give to parents of these teens and tweens, young adults who are going through these major transitions in terms of trying to keep themselves regulated at times that are really, really stressful?
I think advocating, helping them become their own advocates
Yes.
is really important, so that they can speak to their needs. And I do like to think we are in a more accommodating world than we were,
We are.
when we were growing up.
Yeah.
So,
We didn't have any of this. No zones of
yeah,
regulation, no
yeah.
stress balls, no anything.
Everyone was
Oh,
sit
so
square in your chair
yeah,
and follow
listen,
along.
just listen.
Yep. So I think that's something that I really advocate for them to become advocates. As they're entering middle school and into their high school, that they're understanding their needs. They can speak to their disability if they have one and help them become a spokesperson for themselves and what they need to get their needs met. My son is 16 and he was interviewing for his first job, and he was rushing home from school for this online interview last month, and a car nearly clipped him. And
Wow.
so he came home really distraught, and he had about 5 minutes to try to recover before this interview was supposed to happen on Zoom. And I said to him, Daniel, I think you should just email her and be honest and say, I need a little time. And so he did, and they pushed it back. And when he came on, she said, I'm so glad you advocated for yourself. That is a great skill. Uh, and it really actually helped him. He was afraid it would hurt him in this interview process, but it was something that she really recognized. And
Yeah, I mean, I think people generally respect that vulnerability and the ability to say, like, this just happened. This is something I didn't expect. And I think if you're human, which we all are, you can understand that that could have happened to you, and that has happened. All of us have had situations where we had to delay something, cancel something because something else happened. We just have no control over what's going to happen next. So I think that's so great that your son was able to do that instead of pushing through, because he clearly was shaken up.
Right.
And so advocating, that's a perfect example,
Yeah.
right? Like, do you have to
Right.
go through it? And they could have said no, right? That's the
Right.
worst that could happen. And then you would
Right.
just continue. But then that may not be a good match either, because if you're applying for a job that says no when you're rattled and went through something that's
Right.
really intense, do you really want
Right.
to be there?
Right.
That
And
could
you're
be a good
being
way.
yeah, you're being forced to mask, and that's not right going to be a healthy fit for your well-being either, or your
Yeah,
regulation and your nervous system. So,
right. So through the
absolutely, good
so
point.
yeah, so through these transitions, right? So it seems like there's a lot of advocacy needed, but also preparing them with this advocacy. This has to be all across the board because, of course, if you just miss the meeting, which happens sometimes, because you're overwhelmed, but you don't say anything. I work with an individual like this who's about 21 years old, but still sometimes needs coaching into saying, like, to actually saying, I won't be able to be present today. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. And that's fine. Or let's do remote instead of in person today because there's a lot going on. Saying that is totally understandable. Not showing up at all could be the problem. So this is where I think a lot of the transition stuff comes in, like to your point of, okay, well, will I show up? Will I not? But how am I going to deliver that message? Or will that message even get delivered? Right. And sometimes I think we're so much in that red zone that we almost forget that we're supposed to show up, which again is part of human nature. But
Right. But then having that awareness, if you can recognize, like, okay, I'm not in a good place. My goal is maybe like in his situation, I want to get this job, but I'm feeling too dysregulated to do that. You know, he, it's more than just like in the moment, this tool is going to help me calm down, right?
right.
Like, I need some time. Like, I'm really like physiologically, unwell, I guess I hate
Yeah.
to say it.
Yeah. No, but that's a good point. Yeah.
And so, you could think of advocacy then as another tool in your toolbox to say, like, okay, I need time, or I need an accommodation for
Right.
this.
And again, we are more accommodating now as a society. Back when we were growing up, if we would have said that, maybe they would have said, "We don't want to work with you." But now we're living in a world that is more understanding of the fact that things happen, right? Life is always throwing curveballs. But I think it's great to have an institution that you're going to go to that understands that. And what better way to test them than, I know he didn't set that up, but just in a way of, okay, like this happened, and how are you going to react to that? Just as much as they're testing you, I feel like maybe we should be testing them to see if they can really accommodate us, you know?
I totally agree. I told him this interview is a two-way street. Like, this
Yeah.
is as much of you interviewing them as them interviewing you. And you get to decide. You hold
Yeah.
power.
And that's great that you're teaching him that, because I feel like that's also a message to parents, right? Like that whenever they're going through these transitions and they're interviewing or they're networking, right? It's like, it's not just about you getting or receiving whatever it may be. This may not even be a match for you. This may be a dream. This may be exciting, but it may not even be the thing. So, as we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you if there's one practical message that you want to send along with your zones of regulation to any teen and tween, or any parent of a teen and tween, or any professional that may be still confused even after this talk, even though it was broken down well, that may still have some confusion about how to support this dysregulation that's so prevalent.
Yeah. Well, I would just encourage them to, zoom out throughout our lifetime. They can anticipate they will continue to have highs and lows, ups and downs, and unfortunately, many challenges along the way that are going to throw them into more dysregulation and states. So sometimes I think the mindset of some of our youth, I have two teenagers. I don't need this. This is stupid.
Mm, common,
But,
yeah.
you know, the reality is we're mom and dad are working on this, your teachers are working on this, and this is something we continue to need throughout our lifetime. So, it just being open to, taking on ways to just support themselves, find what their toolbox is, you know, be a little vulnerable to, look introspectively and say, yep, this is where my feelings are at right now, and this is what my needs are
Yeah.
to support myself. And that's okay. Like, we don't have to push through everything. We don't naturally, that this age group, those teens, it's like they're fiercely trying to gain that independence and set those boundaries. But it's something I'm trying to give them a tool that makes it more accessible for them to approach their regulation and think about their feelings and what they can do to support them so that they can solve the problem or get through the challenge or, feel supported through the struggle.
Yeah, that's so great. Leah, first of all, thank you for designing this curriculum because it's something, again, that I used even back in 2011, 2012. I think I was using it alongside my individuals that had social communication challenges and were dysregulated. So thank you so much for introducing such a great curriculum, but also sharing such important lessons that can be imparted on so many that are listening. Just you're so warm, you're so empathetic, but you really, really have a mission here that seems to be a focal point now in our society. So thank you so much for all of that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thanks again for the invitation to be on your podcast.
Of
And
course, it was my
an
pleasure, my
honor to
honor.
be among all the great people you've had on here. So,
What's your go-to place or go-to places where people can actually access you or your curriculum?
yeah, zonesofregulation.com is our website, and you can learn a lot there. We have handles on Facebook and Instagram, Zones of Regulation. You can find us as well as LinkedIn.
Okay,
And
great.
yeah,
Great. Well, thanks again.
come check us out. We have tons of blogs. We've got some free resources. You can see a visual of what the zones looks like and get that downloaded too. So,
Fantastic, Leah. It's such a
yeah.
pleasure having you. I love the SLPOT collaboration. It just
Yeah,
warms
well,
my heart.
SLP's often and we're my closest work
Yeah,
friends.
we're
So
allies. We're
we
allies
gotta
all the time.
we
Yeah.
got through it together. So, well, take care. Thank you.